In my 50s, I thought I knew what loneliness felt like. The kind that creeps in during quiet mornings over a cup of black coffee and lingers as you walk through a silent house. My daughter, Caroline, was married and settled in another state, busy with her own life. My husband passed away a decade ago, and I'd made peace with my solitude, or so I thought. My routine had become predictable. Wake up at 6 a.m., water the plants, go for a walk, and visit the grocery store every Friday. That was my way of escaping the stillness of the house, of feeling like I was part of the bustling world outside. The local grocery store wasn't anything special, just a small neighborhood place where I'd see the same familiar faces every week. But this summer something, or rather someone, changed everything. It was a bright June morning, the kind that makes you feel like anything is possible. I was standing in the produce section, trying to pick the ripest avocados when a voice interrupted my thoughts. "Those look tricky, huh? You never really know until you cut them open." I turned to see a young man, maybe in his late 20s or early 30s, with an easy smile and deep blue eyes that sparkled like the ocean under the sun. He had a playful energy that was almost contagious, and I found myself smiling back at him. He introduced himself as Daniel. I laughed, holding up the avocado. "You're telling me?" "Half the time, they're either rock hard or already brown inside." He chuckled. "Mind if I show you a trick? It's all in the stem. If it pops off easily and it's green underneath, it's good." I watched as he picked one up, effortlessly finding a perfect avocado. There was something captivating about the way he moved, so confident yet not cocky. He handed it to me with a little flourish, like he'd just performed a magic trick. "Thanks, Daniel," I said, feeling a little flutter in my chest. I brushed it off as a fleeting moment of flattery. It had been years since a man looked at me like that, if ever. I figured it was just his charm. He probably made everyone feel like the center of the universe. But as the weeks went by, I found myself looking forward to these Friday encounters. It became our little ritual. We'd chat by the produce section, exchange stories about our lives, and laugh like old friends. He made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. I'd start picking out outfits on Friday mornings with a bit more care, fussing over my hair and adding a hint of lipstick, something I hadn't done in ages. One day, as we lingered by the apples, he said, "You know, I look forward to our chats. It's the best part of my week." My heart skipped a beat. "Me too," I admitted softly, surprising myself with how much I meant it. What was this feeling? It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. I thought I'd forgotten how to feel like this, that those butterflies were something only young girls experienced. And yet here I was, a 53-year-old widow, blushing like a teenager in the grocery store aisle. This was the beginning of something I couldn't quite name yet, but I knew it was the start of a journey I hadn't expected to take that I couldn't get Daniel out of my mind. The way he looked at me, the genuine interest in his eyes, made me feel like I was more than just a woman in her 50s. I felt alive, like I was waking up from a long, dreamless sleep. It was as though the vibrant colors of the world had been turned up a notch. One Friday, as I pushed my cart aimlessly through the aisles, he found me first. "Hey, stranger," he said with that playful grin of his. "You look like you're lost in thought. Anything I can help with?" I laughed nervously. "Oh, just trying to remember if I need more milk, or if I'm just making excuses to be here." He raised an eyebrow. "You don't need an excuse, you know. I'm glad you're here." We ended up chatting for almost an hour, moving from the bread section to the frozen foods without even realizing it. He told me about his work at a local startup, how he was new to the area and still getting used to the quietness of this small town. He was originally from New York City, and the change of pace had been a shock for him. I told him about my daughter, Caroline, and how she kept asking me to move closer to her, but I couldn't bring myself to leave my home. It held too many memories. "Is that why you seem a little lonely?" he asked, his voice gentle, his blue eyes searching mine. I felt my breath hitch. No one had ever noticed. Or if they did, they never dared to say it out loud. "Maybe," I whispered. "It's been a while since I've had someone to talk to like this." He touched my arm lightly, the gesture so casual yet electric. "Well, you do now," he said, and there was a sincerity in his voice that I couldn't deny. After that day, we exchanged phone numbers. It felt silly, like something out of a rom-com, but it was Daniel's idea. "In case you need another avocado tip," he joked. But there was an unspoken understanding between us that it was more than that. We began texting almost every day. He'd send me pictures of his messy attempts at cooking, asking for advice, and I'd tease him about his burnt pancakes. We'd meet for coffee at the small cafe near the park, where we'd sit for hours talking about everything and nothing: music, books, our favorite movies. He was smart, witty, and surprisingly insightful for someone so young. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, I found myself typing a message to him before I could stop myself. "Me, you make my days a little brighter, you know that?" The 3 little dots appeared as he typed back. "Daniel, I could say the same about you. I never thought I'd meet someone like you here." I read that message over and over, my heart swelling with something I hadn't felt in years. Could he really mean it? What was he seeing in me? An older woman with wrinkles and a lifetime of baggage. The next Friday, when I walked into the grocery store, he was already there, waiting by the entrance with a small bouquet of daisies. "For you," he said almost shyly. I stared at the flowers, then at him. "Daniel, you didn't have to." "I wanted to," he interrupted, stepping closer. "You deserve someone who brings you flowers just because." I took the bouquet, my hands trembling slightly as I held it to my chest. "You're going to make me cry in the middle of the grocery store," I whispered. He reached out and wiped away a single tear that escaped down my cheek. "Then let's get out of here," he said softly. "Let's go somewhere we can just be." And just like that, we left the store together, hand in hand. It felt surreal, like a dream I didn't want to wake up from. We walked to the nearby park, found a quiet bench, and sat there in silence, simply enjoying each other's presence as the sun dipped below the horizon. It was the first time in a long while that I felt truly happy. I knew something was happening between us, something neither of us could ignore any longer. And as I sat there with Daniel, the young man who had somehow managed to turn my world upside down, I realized I wasn't ready to let go of this feeling. Not yet. It happened gradually, like the slow bloom of a flower, until one day it was just there in full color, staring me in the face. I was falling for him. Daniel, this young man who was closer in age to my daughter than to me. I tried to ignore it, brushing it off as a fleeting infatuation, but the feeling only grew stronger, deepening with every conversation, every shared laugh, and every look that lingered just a second too long. I first realized it one evening, alone in my kitchen. I was making dinner, chopping vegetables, and humming a song from my youth. It was an old habit, one that always soothed me. I hadn't felt this light, this giddy in years. My hands moved almost automatically, and before I knew it, I was preparing Daniel's favorite pasta dish, the one he'd once mentioned during one of our many conversations about food. I stopped, staring down at the cutting board. Why was I doing this? He wasn't even coming over. I was just thinking about him. My heart raced, and I felt a blush creep up my neck like I was some love-struck teenager. It was absurd. I was a grown woman. I had lived through marriage, motherhood, and widowhood. I was supposed to be past all this. But there it was, undeniable. The next time we met for coffee, I couldn't keep my eyes off him. The way his shirt stretched over his broad shoulders, the crinkle of his eyes when he smiled, the way he ran his fingers through his tousled hair as he talked about his latest project at work. He was so full of life, so vibrant. It was intoxicating. "You're quiet today," he noted, tilting his head as he studied me. "Is everything okay?" I forced a smile, trying to mask the turmoil brewing inside me. "I'm fine. Just thinking." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his face only inches from mine. "Thinking about what?" I hesitated, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. I wanted to tell him everything. How he'd made me feel alive again. How he was the first person in years who made me excited to wake up in the morning. But I was afraid. What if he laughed? What if he thought it was ridiculous, this older woman harboring such feelings for him? Instead, I just shrugged and forced a light laugh. "You know, life. Nothing important." He didn't seem convinced. He reached across the table and took my hand in his. It was such a simple gesture, but it sent a shiver down my spine. "You're important," he said softly. "You know that, right?" I pulled my hand back, startled by the intensity of his gaze. "Daniel, you don't know what you're saying." "Don't I?" He looked at me, really looked at me, as if he was searching for something in my eyes. "You think I don't know what's going on here? That I don't feel it too?" His words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Feel what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He leaned back, exhaling slowly as if he'd been holding his breath. Us. There's something here, isn't there? You can't tell me you don't feel it too. I wanted to deny it, to tell him he was wrong. But I couldn't. My silence was enough of an answer. He reached out again, this time gently tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. It's okay to feel it, he said, his voice almost pleading. We don't have to figure everything out right now. But we can't pretend it's not real. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. Daniel, it's not that simple. I'm old enough to be your mother. And yet you're not my mother, he said with a soft smile. You're you. And I like you. A lot. I blinked, tears spilling over despite my best efforts. He reached out, catching one with his thumb, and the tenderness of the gesture undid me. I let out a choked laugh. You're impossible, you know that? He grinned, his blue eyes lighting up. Maybe, but you seem to like that about me. I couldn't help but smile through my tears. He was right. I did. I liked everything about him. And that scared me more than anything had in a long time. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of emotions, a chaotic mix of joy, fear, and uncertainty. I couldn't stop thinking about Daniel. When I wasn't with him, I'd replay our conversations in my head, remembering every smile, every touch. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to jump but paralyzed by the fear of what might happen if I did. Society doesn't prepare women like me for this, falling for a younger man. The stigma, the whispers, the judgmental looks. I could almost hear the gossip if people found out. What's she doing with him? Doesn't she know how ridiculous she looks? It was as though I could see the headlines in my small town. Widow loses her mind, chases after youth. I would wake up in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling, questioning everything. Was I being foolish? Was this nothing more than a midlife crisis? And what about Daniel? He could have any woman he wanted. Young, vibrant, with her whole life ahead of her. What could he possibly see in me? A woman with wrinkles, stretch marks, and a lifetime of memories I wasn't sure I was ready to share. But then there were moments that made me forget all those doubts. Moments like when he texted me goodnight every evening, telling me how much he looked forward to seeing me again. Or when he would brush a lock of hair from my face and say, "You're beautiful," with such conviction that I almost believed him. He made me feel like I was the only woman in the world. One afternoon, we were sitting on a park bench, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted with shades of pink and gold, the kind of sunset that makes you believe in magic. Daniel turned to me, his face softened by the fading light. "Tell me what you're thinking," he said. I hesitated. I had been trying to keep my guard up, to protect myself from the flood of emotions threatening to spill over. But the look in his eyes, so open and genuine, broke down my defenses. "I'm scared," I admitted. My voice trembled, and I hated how vulnerable I sounded. "This isn't supposed to happen. I'm supposed to be past all this, the butterflies, the racing heart. Falling in love wasn't part of the plan." Daniel took my hand, threading his fingers through mine. "Who said love has an age limit? Who made that rule?" His words made me laugh, but it was a bitter laugh, one filled with all the fears I'd been trying to suppress. Everyone. Society. The world. He squeezed my hand gently. "Well, the world is wrong," he said simply. "And I don't care about any of that. I care about you." I looked at him, my heart in my throat. "Daniel, I'm not young. I've lived a whole life already. I have scars, stories, and a past that I can't erase. And I want all of that," he said, his voice raw and honest. "I want every part of you, the good and the bad. I don't care about your age. I care about how you make me feel, and how I want to make you feel." I blinked back tears, overwhelmed by his sincerity. It was as if he could see straight into my soul, past all the walls I had built up over the years. "I don't know if I can do this," I whispered. "I'm scared of getting hurt again." He pulled me closer, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "Then let's take it slow," he murmured. "We don't have to have all the answers right now. We just need to be honest with each other." I nodded, resting my head on his shoulder, letting myself sink into the comfort of his embrace. For a moment, the world fell away, and it was just the two of us, sitting on that park bench, suspended in time. I don't know what this is, I said quietly, but I know I don't want to lose it. You won't, he promised, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. I'm not going anywhere. I closed my eyes, letting myself believe him, just for a moment. Maybe this was crazy, maybe it wouldn't last, but for now I decided to let myself feel it. To let the love wash over me like a wave, even if I was terrified of being pulled under. For the first time in years, I felt something I thought I had lost forever. Hope. The decision gnawed at me for days. I could feel it building like a storm on the horizon, the anticipation mingling with fear. I wanted more than our brief, fleeting moments at the park or the cafe. I wanted to share a piece of my world with him, to invite him into the private corners of my life. But the thought of it also terrified me. This wasn't just a small step. It was a leap into uncharted territory. I hadn't invited anyone into my home since my husband passed away. It was my sanctuary, the place where I'd hidden my grief, where I'd rebuilt myself, piece by piece. Inviting Daniel inside felt like opening up an old wound, allowing someone to see the scars I'd carefully hidden. One evening, as we were saying our goodbyes after another coffee date, I found myself blurting it out before I could stop myself. Would you like to come over for dinner tomorrow night? The words hung in the air between us, and I immediately regretted it. I felt exposed, like I'd just laid my heart out on the table. Daniel's face lit up with that boyish grin of his, the one that could melt even the hardest of hearts. I'd love to, he said, without a moment's hesitation. I forced a smile, nodding as if this were the most natural thing in the world, but inside, my stomach twisted into knots. Okay, great. I'll text you my address. As I walked away, my nerves were on fire. What had I done? Was I really ready for this? The questions flooded my mind, but there was no turning back now. I'd crossed a line, and the only way forward was to see where it led. The next day was a blur of activity. I cleaned the house like a woman possessed, scrubbing the floors, dusting every surface, and rearranging furniture that had been in the same place for years. It wasn't just about impressing him. It was about trying to make everything perfect, to control the situation that felt so wildly out of control. I decided to cook one of my favorite recipes, something comforting and familiar. A roast chicken with rosemary and lemon, creamy mashed potatoes, and a crisp green salad. It was a meal I'd made countless times for family dinners, but this time it felt different. I found myself wanting it to be perfect for him, wanting to show him that I could be more than just the older woman he met in the grocery store. As the clock ticked closer to 7, I felt like I was back in high school, getting ready for a date. I changed outfits 3 times, finally settling on a simple blue dress that brought out the color of my eyes. I brushed my hair, put on a touch of makeup, and added a spritz of the perfume I hadn't worn in years. It felt silly, but I wanted to look nice for him. At 7 p.m. sharp, the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, smoothing down my dress before opening the door. There he was, standing on my porch, holding a bottle of wine, and looking every bit as handsome as I remembered. He was dressed casually, in a white shirt and jeans, but he still managed to look like he'd stepped out of a magazine. "Hi," he said, his smile warm and easy. "You look beautiful." "Thank you," I replied, my voice softer than I intended. I stepped aside to let him in, feeling the flutter of butterflies in my stomach. "Come on in." He stepped inside, looking around my home with curiosity and something else, a quiet reverence, as though he understood the significance of this moment for me. "It's lovely," he said, turning back to me. "It feels warm, like you." I laughed, feeling the tension ease just a little. "I try." We made our way to the kitchen, where the scent of roasted chicken filled the air. He uncorked the wine, pouring us each a glass as I finished plating the food. It felt surprisingly natural, like we'd done this 100 times before. As we sat down to eat, I realized how quiet the house felt. Usually, the silence was something I hated, a reminder of everything I'd lost. But tonight it felt different. It felt intimate. "This is amazing," he said, taking a bite of the chicken. "You're a great cook." "I had a lot of practice," I said with a smile, feeling a blush creep up my neck. "I used to cook for my family all the time." Daniel's expression softened. "You don't talk about your husband much," he said gently. I paused, setting down my fork. It was a subject I usually avoided, but tonight, with him sitting across from me, I felt the urge to be honest. He was a good man, I said quietly. But he's been gone for a long time now. I'm sorry, Daniel said, reaching across the table to take my hand. I didn't mean to bring up painful memories. I squeezed his hand, shaking my head. It's okay. It feels good to talk about it, actually. I've spent so long keeping everything bottled up, afraid to let anyone in. He held my gaze, his blue eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't quite name. You can let me in, he said softly. If you want to. My heart clenched at his words, and I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I blinked them back, nodding slowly. I want to, I whispered. I really do. He smiled, a tender, understanding smile. And I knew then that I'd made the right decision. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't alone. As the night went on, we lingered at the table long after the food was gone, talking, laughing, and sharing pieces of our pasts. It was more than just a dinner. It was a turning point, a moment I knew I'd remember forever. When he finally left, pressing a soft kiss to my cheek as he said goodnight, I stood in the doorway watching him walk away. The house felt quiet again, but this time it wasn't the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of something new, something hopeful. And for the first time in a long time, I went to bed with a smile on my face. The days that followed felt like I was walking in a dream, each moment colored by the warmth of what had begun to blossom between Daniel and me. We continued seeing each other, slipping into a rhythm that felt natural despite the underlying uncertainty. Each time we were together, I could feel the depth of our connection growing, the invisible threads that had first drawn us to each other now becoming stronger, more tangible. But it wasn't until that night, when he visited again, that something shifted. It was a quiet evening, the kind that makes you feel like the world outside has slowed down, allowing you to exist in a bubble of your own creation. I'd invited him over again, this time for a simple evening, no grand gestures, just dinner and some time to talk. But when the doorbell rang and I opened it, I was struck by how much I'd come to look forward to these moments with him. He was standing there, a familiar bottle of wine in hand, his smile lighting up his face. But it wasn't just the smile. It was the way he looked at me, as if I were the only person in the room, the only person in his world. It made my heart race, even now, so many months after we first met. Hi, he said softly, stepping inside. The usual playful banter was replaced with something deeper, more serious. His eyes scanned my face as if searching for something, and I knew what he was looking for. The same thing I was searching for in his. Hi, I said, my voice just a little shaky, betraying the nervousness I tried to hide. It's good to see you. After we settled into the familiar comfort of the living room, with the wine poured and the dinner nearly ready, I found myself stealing glances at him, wondering if he felt the same magnetic pull I did. I had never let myself feel so vulnerable before, but with him it felt different.
Real?
Like I was finally living, truly living, in a way I hadn't in years. He set his glass down and looked at me with that look again. That look that said everything without a single word. There was something in his eyes that made me feel exposed, as though he could see all of me, every fear, every scar, and every dream I'd long buried. And yet, despite the vulnerability, I didn't feel afraid. I felt safe. I've been thinking about something, he said suddenly, his voice low, as if testing the waters. I tilted my head, curious. What's that? He leaned forward, his gaze never leaving mine. About us, about what this could be. I swallowed hard, my heart thumping painfully in my chest. I had been thinking about it too, more than I cared to admit, but I wasn't sure I was ready to say it out loud. I wasn't sure I could. What do you think it could be? I asked, trying to sound casual, though my pulse quickened. He took a breath, sitting back in his chair as he looked at me with an intensity that made everything else fall away. I think it could be something real, he said softly. Something that's worth fighting for. His words were a quiet promise, one that seemed to hang in the air, fragile and yet undeniable. My breath caught in my throat. For the first time, I could see the depth of what he felt, and I realized that it wasn't just about me anymore. This was about us, about what we had created, the bond that had grown between us in such a short time. I swallowed the lump in my throat, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this, I confessed, the words spilling out before I could stop them. I'm scared, Daniel Scared of what people will say, of how things might turn out. I've already lived a full life. What if this is just a fantasy? He was quiet for a moment, his gaze softening with understanding. Then he reached out, his hand gently taking mine, his touch warm and reassuring. Life is a collection of moments, he said. And this moment, what we have right now, it's real. It's not a fantasy. And I don't care what anyone else thinks. I care about you. About us. I blinked back the tears that threatened to spill, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his voice. I had been so closed off for so long, unwilling to let anyone in. But Daniel was different. He made me want to open up, to embrace what scared me the most. The silence between us grew, heavy with unspoken words, and in that stillness, I felt something shift, something that felt like the beginning of something beautiful. He leaned in slowly, his lips brushing my forehead with a soft, lingering kiss. I don't want to rush this, he whispered. But I want you to know I'm in this. Whatever it is, I'm here. I closed my eyes, leaning into him, the warmth of his body grounding me, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat syncing with mine. In that moment, everything else faded into the background. There was only us. There was only the present, the now, the love we were building together, piece by piece. When I opened my eyes again, I felt different. Not just older, but wiser, braver. For the first time in years, I felt alive in a way I hadn't imagined possible. And as Daniel pulled me closer, kissing me gently on the lips, I knew that whatever happened, I was ready to take the next step, to see where this would go. The days after Daniel's visit were filled with an undeniable sense of change. I was no longer the woman who walked through life with a careful distance from others, afraid to open up, afraid to feel. I had stepped into something so unexpected, so wild, that it made me question everything I had ever known about love, about age, about myself. I spent hours reflecting on what had changed in me, on what this relationship, this thing I had with Daniel, meant. It wasn't just the physical attraction, though that was certainly undeniable. It was more than that. It was the way he made me feel seen, valued and desired, not for what I had been, but for who I was in the present. I had spent so much of my life being defined by the past, by my years of marriage, by the roles I had played as a wife and a mother. I had lived for so long in the shadow of those memories, of what I thought I was supposed to be. But now, with Daniel, I felt like I was writing a new story. One where age didn't matter. One where love didn't come with a set of rules or restrictions. People often say that love is a young person's game, that passion fades with age, that as you grow older you settle for companionship rather than excitement. They say it's foolish to believe that someone my age could still experience the kind of love reserved for the young and carefree. But in Daniel, I had found something I had thought was long gone, a connection that set my soul on fire, that made me feel as though I was seeing the world for the first time again. It wasn't easy, of course. There were moments of doubt, moments where I questioned whether I was too old to be starting something new. Could I really keep up with him? Would I be able to give him what he needed? Would society ever let us live in peace? And then there was the part of me that worried I was simply fooling myself, that this was nothing more than a fleeting infatuation. But when I saw Daniel, when I heard his voice, when he held me, all those doubts melted away. It was real. What we shared was as real as anything I had ever known. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had eaten countless meals over the years, where I had sat alone many times after my husband's death. I reflected on the life I had lived, the good and the bad, and I realized something crucial. Age was just a number. Love wasn't something that had an expiration date. It didn't belong to the young, the carefree, the perfect people with flawless skin and endless possibilities. It belonged to anyone who was willing to open their heart, regardless of how many years had passed. The next time I saw Daniel, I couldn't help but tell him all of this. I needed him to understand the gravity of what he was offering me, what we were building together. I've been thinking about us, I said, looking up at him as we sat on the couch together. He was leaning against the armrest, his head tilted in that way he did when he was genuinely listening, when he cared about every word I said. I've been thinking too, he replied, his smile gentle but knowing. I can't help it. You make me want to be a better person. I don't know how to explain it. I've never felt this way before. I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. It's scary, isn't it? How easily we can change, how much we can give and take from each other, even when the world around us says we shouldn't. He nodded, his hand reaching out to take mine. I don't care what the world says. I care about what we say. And in that moment, I realized that this was the truth of it all. Love didn't come with restrictions. It didn't care about age, or expectations, or past mistakes. It simply was. And it was enough. Do you ever think about the future? I asked, my voice softer now. The weight of the question hung between us, but I needed to know. Daniel's eyes softened, and he squeezed my hand. Every day. And with you I see a future. One where we don't have to explain ourselves to anyone. Where it's just us. I don't care about the years between us. I care about the time we have together. I felt my heart swell with emotion. A mixture of relief and hope. For the first time in years, I felt that maybe, just maybe, I had a future too. Not one dictated by the past, but one forged in the present, with the man sitting beside me. I'm not sure where this will go, I admitted, but I know I want to go there with you. His answer was simple, but it was all I needed to hear. Then we'll figure it out together. As I looked at him, the man who had stolen my heart despite the years that separated us, I realized that love wasn't just for the young. It was for anyone who was brave enough to believe in it, no matter how many years had passed. And in that moment, I knew that the most beautiful love stories were the ones that broke the rules, that defied expectations. Love at any age, it was possible. It was real. And it was mine. I woke up the next morning with a sense of peace that had eluded me for so long. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the air itself had shifted since Daniel had come into my life. And maybe it had. It wasn't just him, it was me too. I had changed. I had opened myself up to something I never thought I would allow again. Something as raw, as powerful, as beautiful as love. I made my coffee, watching the steam swirl above the mug, and thought about the journey that had brought me here. The long years of being alone, the painful loss of my husband, the silent nights where I thought I would never feel that kind of connection again. I had spent so long convincing myself that my best years were behind me, that I was too old for this. Too old for love, too old for passion, too old for any of it. But Daniel had proven me wrong. And not just about love, but about the possibility of growth at any age. I had spent so much of my life letting fear dictate my choices. Fear of judgment, of what others would think, of the unknown. But here I was in my 50s, falling for a man who was half my age. And it wasn't just some fleeting crush. It was something real. Something that, against all odds, had found a way to thrive. I had learned something important through this journey, that love has no boundaries. It doesn't care about your age, your history, or your mistakes. It's just there, waiting for you to take a chance on it, no matter where you are in life. It's easy to look at the years behind you and think that they define you, that your best moments are over. But that's a lie. Our best moments are still ahead of us, as long as we have the courage to embrace them. I thought back to the quiet conversations Daniel and I had shared. We talked about everything. Our pasts, our dreams, our fears. And in those conversations, I realized that love wasn't just about grand gestures or perfect moments. It was about the little things, the quiet understanding between us, the way he looked at me like I was the most important person in the room, the way we both let down our walls one piece at a time. As I reflected on it all, I realized I was no longer afraid. I wasn't afraid of the judgment, the whispers behind our backs, or the questions about our age difference. Because I had something deeper, something worth more than anything society could offer, a love that was mine, one that had blossomed against all odds. And that was enough. I couldn't tell you what the future held for us. Maybe it would last a few months, maybe longer. Maybe it would end in heartache. But whatever happened, I knew that this was a gift I couldn't let go of. I had given myself permission to love, to feel, and to be loved in return. I had opened my heart, and that was the greatest gift I could give myself. I finished my coffee, feeling the warmth settle inside me, and smiled. I didn't need to have all the answers anymore. The only thing I needed to do now was live, fully, openly, and without regret. Love, at any age, was worth the risk. And no matter what anyone else thought, I was going to keep taking that risk. Because I had learned that love doesn't fade with age. it only grows stronger.